There's something I was reminded of recently, which I think is hilariously absurd. Because if you actually understand how anything in the world works, you'd know that this is fucking ridiculous. And that is the idea of a Proto-Indo-European sky daddy god, right? Sky father, something like that. And the idea of this, the basic idea here is that, well, first, Proto-Indo-Europeans were a people that existed. You have to assume that. And that they had a religion, which we can sort of partially figure out in some degree. And within that religion, they had a primary god. There are a number of them which are alleged, but there was a primary god, which corresponds to the Greek Zeus. Okay. And the name of this god was literally Sky Daddy or Sky Father, right? There's some problems with this. There's many problems with this. One of them being, it is it is first attested in Mycenaean Greek, which means it is possibly originally a Greek concept, just from this part, right? It was originally attested in Mycenaean Greek, and in Mycenaean Greek, the name for this deity is simply Diwa. Okay, Diwa. Now, in every other Indo-European language it is attested in, which comes later, it is that name plus the word for father in that language. So like Dios, Pitar, or Jupiter, or shit like that, right? So Latin is Jupiter. So like Diwa became like you. It got shortened to like Dieu, or and then you have Father, Pitar, Jupiter, right? And the way that it's described in any of these traditions is that he is the father of the gods. Okay. And corresponds to the sun. Now, also in these other languages, like Latin and Sanskrit, the generic word, like Deva, or Diva, or Devi, or something like this, right? It just refers to the category of gods, the category of heavenly beings in general, right? So really, Deus, Pitar, whatever the fuck, is really just the father of the gods. That's literally what it means. And yes, he's associated with the sun or the daytime sky, that's true. But one of the problems here, this basic word, Deva, something like that, it only means sky in languages which are not Indo-European. Namely, the Finnic languages, like Finnish, where it's taivas. And I probably pronounced that not so great, but something like that, Taivas, taivas. I think I spelled that right. And Estonian, which I think is pretty much pronounced the same way, taivas, Taevas, something like that. Across the Finnic languages, this is the word for sky, right? Some Indo-European languages have words like nebu, so there was definitely a nasalization on the first consonant, so it's clearly has the same origin, but it shifted a little bit, right? And the V turned into like a B, right? So these are subtle changes, but it is different, and this is where we get the word like nebula, meaning cloud, right? Or yeah, Spanish and nebla, shit like that. But there's more problems here because these terms, as I've already alluded to, are not isolated to Indo-European, and this doesn't even mean within Indo-European, Deva or something like that means gods, not a specific god, except for in Greek. In Mycenaean Greek, it means this specific God. And everywhere else, it just means gods in general. And interestingly, there's this claim that, oh, this is weird, that Zeus is the only Greek god whose name corresponds to our Proto-Indo-European reconstruction. No, that's not weird, because it's originally Greek in the first place. You can tell because the name is simpler in Greek than anywhere else. They had to explain it. It's not a name anywhere else. It's an explanation. It's a phrase. The father of the gods. Everywhere else, in Sanskrit and Latin, whatever the fuck. It's only a name in Greek. And it retained that. And now this poses a problem because Greek is not Proto-Indo-European. So if it's a Greek invention which spread to other Indo-European languages, this cannot be a Proto-Indo-European concept. Right? You see the problem here? Now, it goes deeper because there's some related words here. Like, which relate to like the English word day. So the Slavic word for day, dan, depending on whatever Slavic language you're speaking, it might sound slightly different from that, but roughly something along those lines. This is alleged to be internal to Indo-European. This is derived from something like Deva, or kind of depends on how you look at it, like who you're using as your source. But there's supposedly this internal logic within Indo-European where this word for day is derived from or closely related to, or some bullshit with the alleged word for sky in Proto-Indo-European, which is only a word for sky in Finnic languages, not any Indo-European languages that have ever been attested. It's never been attested as the word for sky in any Indo-European language ever. This word, dan, there's some Indo-European languages that have it more as dian. This is notable because in Chinese, the word for heaven or day, or one of the words for day, is tian. It's the same fucking word. And this is in Chinese. Chinese isn't Indo-European. It's across the fucking continent. Jesus. But it gets worse than this, because we actually have this same morpheme, this same word appearing in the Americas, in indigenous languages in the Americas. So, for instance, in Uto-Aztecan, or at least in some Uto-Aztecan, northern Uto-Aztecan languages, I'm not sure about further south, though I suspect it's something very close. In northern Uto-Aztecan languages, for sure, like Ute, I think Southern Paiute has this. And I know for a fact Tono Odom and Akimaro Odom, the Odom languages, have this. Ton means like light, brightness, or warmth, or it can refer to the sun. And sometimes, depending on the language and sometimes the speaker, it can refer to daytime or the night. I don't think it will generally refer to the daytime sky, but I could be wrong about that. But it's absolutely the same word, right? So, like in Otam, tonalik is like light, like right. The root morpheme there is ton, which is related to. It is the same fucking word as Chinese tian for heaven, and it is the same fucking word as Slavic dan for day. And this actually gets worse because there's a whole bunch of languages that exhibit a very slight modification of the first sound of that onset. Instead of a T, they have like a K, right? So Turkish, for instance, their word for day is gun. That's this same morpheme, it just has a slight phonetic alteration at the beginning. But it gets worse because this also occurs in North America, because the Mayan languages have, for their word for day is keen, or keen. Depends on which language it is exactly. Sometimes it's glottalized keen, or sometimes it's not keen. That is exactly the same word. It is cognate, effectively, by some mechanism. I don't think there is a parent language that these are all deriving from. I think that is a very naive way to look at how things work. I think this is evidence of ancient contact. But it spans not only multiple language families, but extremely deep time and the entire northern hemisphere. But it gets worse than this, because not all Indo-European languages have this term. There's and it's basically you certain branches of it do, right? Which tells us that Proto-Indo-European didn't even exist in the first place. Proto-Indo-European is an invalid concept because there was no original language, and within whatever it was that established Indo-European, there was a diversity. There were multiple communities. Some of them used this term for day, and some of them used something else. Also, the word sun is probably also this word, so that would take the T and soften it, right? So the T becomes an S, which in articulation, T and S are virtually the same thing. So that's not weird. So like the Germanic and other branches of Indo-European too, use of an S for that first sound is actually not strange. It makes perfect sense. Yeah, and then you have like the English word day, where it appears to be shortened. It's actually probably not, because if you look across Eurasia, it's really common to find a word like ni, or je, or ra, or la, or something like that being the word for the sun, or the word for day. So, for instance, Chinese, it has tian, but it also has zhe. And this used to be ni, or I don't know what the tone on that was, obviously, which I believe Tibetan has ni, Japanese has ni, a bunch of other languages surely do. And it's not entirely clear that Japanese got this from Chinese. It may have, it may not have. I'm not going to make a claim on that. Plausibly it did. I'm certainly not denying that it could have. Right? I'm not claiming anything on this. But the fact that you're seeing this, and N is almost the same exact sound as duh, D, right? So ni and de, those are probably exactly the same word, right? So in English, in Germanic, you get things like tak, de, whatever. And on all of these, really, you're getting something like ni or ti or ki at the beginning. That's probably just referring to the sun, and the rest of it is actually suffixes, which at various points are probably usefully doing something, and then they're frozen. They get borrowed into something else, and nobody remembers what that was because they don't speak that language anymore. They never did. It was just borrowed in, right? I think this is happening a lot, and it is. You have researchers trying to make these grand propositions, but they're actually not grand enough, because what they're doing is they're looking at previous conclusions like, oh, Proto-Indo-European is valid, Proto-Indo-European is real, and thus when we see this pattern across a whole bunch of Indo-European languages, you construct it back and you draw these weird conclusions, but like Sky Daddy. But the problem is the word is older than that, and it's not Indo-European. It doesn't span all of Indo-European, and it spans far more than Indo-European. What are you doing? You did it wrong. Yeah. What the fuck?